Hi CAD2. We are going to do the Two Become One project this week, and this is how we're going to learn how to digitize and manipulate patterns in Illustrator. But it starts off with some hand patterning, some hand rub-offs that you're going to make of two different garments. Um, Maybe I can post some other people's rub-off videos, but I do think you guys know how to take patterns from clothing. So I'm not going to review that. I'm just going to review how I photograph and digitize the patterns in Illustrator, and then how I can combine them into one pattern and manipulate them. Just some basics about pattern manipulation, adding seam allowance, and all that. So let's get into it. These are the garments I've decided to combine into one for this project. I have just a standard pair of my leggings and then this open-backed shirt from Fabletics. So I patterned these. I actually already had this pattern, but I patterned the Fabletics shirt, and if there is a difference between the front and the back armhole, I wasn't able to see it. So I'm leaving the front and the back armhole the same. So I have put the front and the back pattern both onto one piece with the same armhole. And I have patterned my sleeve on the fold. So it'll be the same on both sides. And then my leggings have a curved waistband piece front and back. So we'll see how we combine all of these together in Illustrator. I am going to take pictures of them now, and what's important when I take pictures is to include a ruler in the picture. And I actually, for ease of photographing, have marked 2 and 3 there. I'm just marking them so I'll be able to see them in the photograph easier. We need to be able to scale the photograph so that 1 inch in the photograph equals 1 inch in Illustrator, which would theoretically equal 1 inch when printed out in real life. So when we take a photograph, I've weighted my patterns down because my paper is really curly, but we have to make sure to get the ruler in there, and we really want to make sure that we aren't like photographing like this or like this, because that would of course affect the lines of the it would affect the shape of the garment significantly. So we want to try to be as much perfectly over and perfectly straight with the pattern as possible, and photograph them. So I'm going to do that for all of these and jump into Illustrator. So I'm in Illustrator and I'm going to create a new 8.5 by 11 inch page, right? So a new letter sized page, 8.5 by 11. And it's nice to go ahead and change the units here, but we're going to make sure that our units are in inches in the preferences as well once we open this up. So I'm going to hit create. So now that it's open, I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to place all of the images I took. And they're coming in really large, which is interesting. It seems like actually for at least this one, which only has the waistbands in it, I'm going to actually have to shrink that down instead of shrink it up to trace it. But for these two, they're going to have to be probably enlarged. Let's go ahead and turn on the rulers. Excuse me, mister. View, rulers, show rulers. So I have actually measured key points on these, like the height and the width of all of my patterns for reference later, but for scaling right now, we are actually going to use the ruler that we have in here, and then we'll use these measurements for reference afterwards. So with the rectangle tool, if you click and drag with the rectangle tool, you make a rectangle, but we are just going to click once with the rectangle tool, and we are going to type in 1 inch and 1 inch. And you can see my scale is actually ginormous because Illustrator just brought these pictures in really large, so we're probably going to have to scale down a lot. Let's make sure my units are in inches up here before I do anything else. So we're going to go to Edit, Preferences, Units, and yeah, General should be in inches. Everything else, we're pretty familiar with points. So here I have my 1 inch square, and I know that this is 1 inch, and I know that I want this to be 1 inch. So I am going to scale this all the way down. And sometimes this can take some kind of finessing. I'm also holding shift while I scale, which is very important. And I'm trying to get the distance between the 2 and the 3, so those marks I made on there are pretty visible. I'm going to try to get those points to line up with the edges of this square, and then we'll know that this is pretty much the right size. Of course, there's always going to be some perspective. Like, you can even tell that there's perspective in this image because, like, these are covering the top of the they're covering the top of the pattern piece on this side, and they're covering the bottom of the pattern piece on this side. I'm getting close here, just a tiny bit smaller, and sometimes this can be kind of a drag. Alright, so that wasn't too bad. I would say that's pretty close to perfect, maybe even a shade too small now. So once I have this in the correct scale, and actually I'm going to put all of these images on layer 1, right? They're all on layer 1 right now. I'm going to save and make a new layer at this point, and I'm going to lock layer 1, and we will come back to it and rescale all the other ones, but just to show you kind of the whole process with this guy. At this point, we know that these should pretty much be the correct scale, and what I can do is kind of like finesse them later on. If they aren't quite exactly the right scale, we'll know because of the measurements I took. So I can actually see, this is helpful. I have written down that the height of the waistband is 3 inches on this front piece, and it's 3.5 on the back piece. So when I'm looking to the right of my cursor right now, I can actually see 2.99 inches, which I'm going to call very good, very close enough to 3 in my book. So with that information, we can check the other measurement I wrote down, but with that information, we do know that this is pretty close to correct. I'm going to trace around this whole shape right now. I don't need it to fill right now, so I'll shut that off. My fill and stroke over there. And let's add one last anchor point. Yeah. So let's measure the other measurements I took for the front waistband, which said that from this point in a horizontal line to here to the center front will be 8 3/8 inches, so just over 8. So it automatically removed that anchor point, and I don't want to do that right now, so I'm holding shift, and now it is adding an anchor point. I'm actually still holding shift, 8.35, that's not bad. So that is how we measure in Illustrator. That's at least the most straightforward way to measure. If your line is exactly horizontal or exactly vertical, you can measure using using line segments, and then if you need to reference how long they are, you can click up here, 8.35. So this is now a perfect representation of our paper pattern, at least by all accounts that I have. I could clean anything up if I needed to adjust. I could clean anything up. I could like move this back and forth. But this is looking good. So I can add seam allowance to this if I want to, just to go over how to do that really quickly. And then I'm going to trace all my other pattern pieces and start manipulating them in here. But if I wanted to add seam allowance to this guy, let me actually shut off, or I'm going to double click on this and lower the opacity of the underlayers. We can go to Object, Path, Offset Path. Offset Path allows you to add another line that is exactly the same shape as this line, just like outside it. So I'm going to check off preview, and it's already looking like some good seam allowance is happening there. And we can go to 0.25 and click somewhere. You have to kind of click somewhere else in order for preview to work in Adobe. And there we have our, oh, well, we'll do 0.5. We have our 1/2 inch seam allowance added there instantly. We would still have to do a little bit of manipulating to remove the extra seam allowance it's added where this piece of the pattern should actually be on the fold. So that's easy enough to do though. This seems to even come with extra anchor points at that point, so we can just delete those and we can draw that back in. And we could line all of those anchor points up if we wanted to. Select all the anchor points with the white selection tool. I'm just clicking and dragging, and then horizontally align them center, because they all should be perfectly vertical. When I took my photographs, I actually lined my ruler and my pieces up with the hardwood floors that I have, and then I lined the hardwood floors up with the edges of the camera, so I knew that I was taking a completely perfectly aligned image, completely straight up and down at least. Okay, so I could add any like text labels I wanted to this. And I would probably select all of this and make it a group. This center line is unnecessary, but I'm going to leave it there anyway. Just that's where I did my measuring. It's easiest to, so when you're measuring your pattern pieces, like you do for when you're making tech packs, you should be measuring like horizontals and verticals as much as possible instead of measuring curves, because curves they're just harder to measure. Perfect. So I'm kind of going to trace around this one and um, add seam allowance. And so I want to make sure that the places where the waistbands join together here are the same length. So I'm going to measure them using the line tool. And just like the pen tool, if I click and drag, it's going to show me that that is 3.06 inches. And if I release, I've added an extra line there that I can just delete. So let's do the same thing over here, 3.08. So that's excellent. I would say that's within tolerance. If we want to, we can switch to the direct selection tool and nudge this baby up and measure again. But really, that is kind of the accuracy we were looking for. So let's add seam allowance to this. Object, path, offset path, 0.5 inches. Preview looks good. If you change the joins, you won't get exactly the same results, but there we go. So let's just remove these again. Let's use align. So I'm selecting all of them and then coming up. Perfect. Let's unlock layer 1 and rescale. So I'm going to turn off layer 2 for a while so we don't mess it up. So we could easily draw another square by going to rectangle and clicking once. Perfect. So we are going to have to scale down, but you may very well have to scale up to get your ruler to line up with an inch. Both are very possible. So let's actually give this some fill. Okay. Let's, again, I'm just going to try to rescale until these are the right size. So these should both be scaled to the 1-to-1 scale now. So I am going to check some of the measurements again. You can use either tool to check the measurements. So I measured from here to here. Pretty close. And from here to here. All right, this needs to be a tiny bit bigger. Let's compare. It might be a tiny bit out of proportion. Yeah, I'm just going to nudge it up a bit. Should be more like here. And this should be more like here. So we aren't that far off. I'll just scale it a tiny bit more and we'll probably start to call that good. Let's compare it to the ruler. Let's see how much of this was perspective. Oh no, that lineup is looking pretty good on the ruler too. So that's another great way of doing it, is measuring line lengths that are the lengths that you have measured and comparing that way as well as the ruler. I would still include a ruler because I think it's the easiest way. So for the medium shirt heights, it was 23, only 22. So let's drop this down at 23. And the width at the armhole is 9 3/4. So that's pretty close actually, because that's 9 1/2. So let's compare its, excuse me. Maybe we could get a tiny bit bigger. Maybe I measured wrong. I can double check how long I made this line under transform, right? The width is how big I made it. So I made it actually a tiny bit too big. And I could actually choose transform and type in, is it 0.325 is 3/8, something like that. So that's actually looking pretty good. Let's make it a tiny bit bigger. Holding shift the whole time. Let's do the sleeve. Yeah, this is much closer to the right measurement, so let me double check that measurement. So yeah, I had written down 23 for this line, but it is actually 22 inches. So that should be much closer to accurate. Yeah, there we go. So all of that is looking great. It's pretty good there too. I think we could even make this all a tiny bit smaller now. And let's check on the ruler. Things are looking good. So I'm going to put these on their own layer and trace around them. So for the medium shirt back, I copied the medium shirt front, and I'm going to use this to teach you some of the pattern manipulation tools that we are going to be using namely the shape builder tool. So I am going to draw a shape, or at least some lines that include all of the lines that I don't have right now in the back of the shirt. So these guys. And then we want to make sure that this shape is probably easiest if it is a closed shape, and we just want to make sure that it doesn't like intersect with the arm and leave a weird hole there. It should go kind of back directly. And I'll get into more of this in a minute, but now we are going to use the shape builder tool. First off, I had to select both of these shapes, right? I'll even make them different fill colors. So that's the shape we drew, and this is our original shape, or the original front of the shirt. And we're using the front of the shirt like this so that like the armhole and this moment and the side seam will be exactly the same on both the front and the back. And then we've selected them both with the black selection tool, and we're going to the shape builder tool. And if we click and drag through these areas that we want to combine, they will become one area. So I definitely want the whole top of this to become one area. And if we hold Alt and click or click and drag through areas we don't want anymore, we will subtract those areas. So the shape builder tool is extremely handy. So some of my vertical center lines were like a little bit crooked one way or the other. So I dragged out a guide and I straightened all of those up, and now I have all my pattern pieces on their own layer. And I'm going to clear my guides. And we are going to start manipulating these. What I thought would be cool is if the leggings started they started with the shirt attached, but then they still had an open back with this piece maybe going across. So I'm gonna have to work this out here, but for starters, I want to measure to the waistline on the shirt. So I'm going to measure my mannequin, and from the high shoulder to the waist on my mannequin was 16.5 inches. So I can instantly make a line that's 16.5 inches with the line segment tool, just like we made a rectangle that was exactly 16.5 inches, or exactly 1 by 1 inch with the rectangle tool. If you just click with the line tool instead of clicking and dragging, you will get the line segment tool options where you can type in 16.5, and we can also make sure that it's going exactly up and down, right? I think this is going to end up going the wrong way, but 90 degrees. So let's hit OK, yeah, and then we'll just line those up again. Okay, let's give it some stroke. So that is the waist, and my pants do have a waistband, but I'm not too worried about that at this point, at least. they're all going to be one piece with the front of the shirts anyway. Um, so this shirt is going to have a seam down the front. I think that's how this is going to work. And right now the leggings are really tight, so the shirt, this is the front of the leggings, and they aren't lining up exactly with the medium shirts. But I think that that's okay because of how we're going to handle the rest of this. So I am going to flip this shirt, and similarly, if you need to like flip and use two sides of a folded garment, I think that that would be fine, using this technique and then like joining them together like we do with flats. So we are going to go to Object, Transform, Reflect, and hit OK. And it did also reflect the words, interestingly enough. And so we are also going to join, I'm going to make sure that these line up, and we are also going to join this to the front of the shirt. So we're going to go ahead and make it smaller. I definitely want these two to line up, but other than that, the most important parts of this pattern to preserve are the armhole, which we can even push out further like this. It should be that when you start on an anchor point and end on an anchor point, they'll line up, but that doesn't seem to be functioning very well. So the parts to preserve are the armhole and the connection right here, and the neck hole is probably good to preserve too. Other than that, we can manipulate as we will down here. So I am going to essentially bring all of this up and rework this line, and then this would get brought up into the back of the shirt, and the front of the shirt would kind of remain the same and have a seam, and then it will attach to the waistband here. I'm going to go ahead and rotate. And it might be easier for finishing sake if this does remain its own separate piece. So I'm going to actually hit Control Z. It would have been good of me to save before I started manipulating, but I did not. Yes, so back here before I started messing around too much, instead of manipulating this or making it smaller by adjusting its own anchor points, which will change how the shirt falls, I am going to draw a line where I want it to be removed, essentially. So instead we want to end closer to right here, and then we'll add the proper seam allowance. For that to be hemmed. So now that we've drawn that line through the shape, if we use the shape builder tool, we can choose, we can hold Alt and subtract the area that we don't want. So all I have to do is select both of them and then switch to the shape builder tool and subtract using Alt. And then I can delete this extra line that I have. So that should be the perfect piece for the back. Now I just have to rethink the front. I'm thinking it's still a bit too wide to flow into these pants, but I think I would rather make the pants wider. So we're going to go over how to do that. We've already combined and divided some shapes. So now we're going to add a little bit of fullness. So honestly, because when we select this anchor point and this anchor point, it preserves the line in between them, I could just grab these two anchor points and use my arrow keys or whatever and drag them to the left to add new new fabric or more fullness. That would definitely work, but I'm more interested in how could we actually split this and add fullness in a way that's more like patterning. So I am going to use the line segment tool and draw a line through this where I want to add fullness. So I'll add a little fullness in the front, but I'm not going to add any fullness in the back. Or should I? I'll add a little fullness in both spots, and what I think is that this will end up being like an elastic waistband right here. So with both of these lines, and these lines have to start and end outside of this shape, so that's why they overhang like this. I'm going to select, I think I'll ungroup this for now, and I will select just the original shape and the lines, but not like the words for right now. I just don't know how that would manipulate it. And then we're going to find the pathfinder tool. So if you don't have the pathfinder tool in your panel, you can find it by going to Window and choosing Pathfinder. And you have to have the shape and the dividing lines selected, and then we can choose Divide. And once we choose Ungroup, and it automatically brings everything to the front, so that's why it looks like we've lost the words, but they're just at the front of the stack right now. So we can choose right click, arrange, send to back, and there are the words. Now we have three separate shapes. So I am going to rotate these, and I can rotate from a specific point by using the rotate tool. So I clicked to place the center point, and now I can rotate these at will, or I clicked to place the center of rotation is what I mean. So whenever I'm done and I want to rotate this one next, I can come to the rotate tool, and you click to place the center of rotation, and then you click and drag on your shape to rotate it. Like I could rotate it all around that center point. And we could even, if I had paid attention to the number of degrees it was showing on the first one, we could make sure that we added the same number of degrees in this one. Perfect. So once we have done that, we can join them back together using the shape builder tool. And actually, once we think our pattern is in good shape, we can adjust using the shape builder tool. So I could have made some of these opaque, which might have been helpful to see the other shapes in between it. I'm feeling like this is looking pretty good. So I am going to select all of these actually, and we are going to use the shape builder tool. And I am going to click and drag through everywhere that I want to become one shape, and sometimes there are like weird little extra moments you have to be careful of. But there it is. So I'm going to straighten this up. There we go. So I want this to have an elastic waist, so let's make a quick rectangle. If we want to, we can even, you know, use the shape builder tool to get that rectangle exactly, or like if we were making a casing, we could use the shape builder tool to make a facing, I mean, right? So let's do that really quick. If I draw a shape, and I'm going to make it a little bit opaque so we can see what's going on, I'll rotate it until I feel like it's parallel or whatever. And then we can, I have to copy and paste this shape. So let me make a backup over here, and we are going to go to, we are going to select both of these leftover shapes and go to the shape builder tool and choose Alt and subtract these guys. Of course, there's all different ways to do that, but then this would be the medium leggings waistbands. How do we print this out? I'm just finishing up some things here, and what we need when printing things out is a bunch of perfectly aligned 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper that we can then tape together to make our pattern. This is not, you know, my favorite way to print out patterns, obviously, but this is what is going to work pretty well here. So we need to arrange the artboards, or add a lot more artboards. So the first thing I'm going to go to do is go to my artboard tool, and then I'm going to come up to the new artboard, and we made a new file with a letter artboard in it, so it's already set to letter, which is what I assume, you know, you might have a printer that can print letter. So we are going to hit new artboard and make, let's start by making 6. We can add more after we adjust the settings. So right now they're appearing with a little bit of space in between them, which wouldn't be good if we were printing things out since we were trying to be exact. So we are going to go to the artboards panel, and if you don't have this panel, you can go to Window, Artboards, and it'll bring it up. And then in the bottom left of the artboards panel, you can choose rearrange all artboards. And now we can tell it that we want no space in between the artboards. And we can tell it we want 3 columns. Three might be good. Maybe we're going to need 4. Nice. So this is starting to look more like yardage of fabric or a piece of paper. And let's see, as we add more artboards, unfortunately it doesn't keep making them in that order. But I guess we can also hit rearrange all up here in the properties panel, and just keep rearranging them until we have enough. I guess we should make a whole bunch more. Alright, there we have too many. So let's try to get these other guys arranged. This one is still backwards, so I'm going to reflect that guy again. So at least his text is going frontwards now. And we can fit these other bits and bobs in there. I've forgotten to add seam allowance to these, so they actually wouldn't be that helpful. They would be okay cutting them out, but we can add seam allowance in here. I've already gone over how to do it, but I'll actually just double click, so I'm editing the group, and then we can edit just this shape. Go to Object, Path, Offset Path, and let's check preview. It's looking good, and we can add that seam allowance, which that's probably good to add before we print. Okay, so let's remove these extraneous artboards. Artboard tool, right. And what I have seen people do with these patterns, I'm actually going to make these all a little bit opaque right now so we can see the artboards underneath. What I have seen people do with printable paper patterns is they put rectangles on the seams between the artboards, and these act as alignment tools. So beyond just aligning your pattern, you're aligning the whole piece of paper, right? And they might even put corresponding letters on each side, like the letter A on this side and the letter A on this side, right? And this would let you know that this is rectangle A, and this is, you know, joint A essentially in this pattern. So we could add this same type deal on each page. And it's probably also helpful to kind of label each artboard. So I could say like artboard 1, and you would know that it's like a 3x3 grid. So in your 27 or whatever artboards, you would be able to arrange them in that grid. And then these join moments would just be extras, right? And we could do the same thing for this intersection, right? The vertical ones, C and C. It's fighting me. Right, and pop that on each side. So once these are printed out, you should, with all of these alignment marks, even if there is like, see, edges of the paper that the printer wouldn't be able to print right up to the edge, you should still kind of be able to fit this together without too much trouble. Of course, it's not the most 100% accurate way of you know, making patterns, but it will get us through, I think. And I found it kind of interesting to learn and figure out. So once you have added them all, which really didn't take me that long to add all of the numbers and all of the artboard numbers, by the way, I made the background squares 50% transparent, so the pattern wouldn't be affected by them. Once you have drawn all of that, what we can do is we can go to File, Save As, and save it as an Adobe PDF. What this will do is it will save all of this as a printable file, and should look pretty good, right? So it's in order of the number of artboards we had, right? But there are all the pages. So you definitely don't have to print it out for homework or even get to the stage where you get ready to print it out by adding all of these numbers. You can just focus on making your pattern pieces for homework, but just to give you the full perspective on how we would actually get these back into physical form at home. Talk to you guys later. Let me know if you have any questions. then we'll rescale the other ones.